Today, we have on Dr. Blackall, who is board certified in clinical child and adolescent psychology. He received his doctorate degree in clinical psychology from Widener University and completed his internship training at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, where he also specialized in the psychological treatment of children with cancer and their families. His primary clinical practice continues to be with childhood cancer patients at the Penn State Hershey Children's Hospital. He is also a professor of pediatrics and humanities at the Penn State College of Medicine, where he co-directs the first-year medical student course, The Science of Mind-Body Medicine. Having two sons play competitive sports through high school and one who currently plays college baseball, provided an opportunity to blend his expertise in psychology with athletics. He has learned the most about the interaction of the mind and body in athletic performance, standing on the sidelines of baseball fields all around the country. I want to introduce Dr. George Blackall. Thank you to joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Jermaine. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So today, give me 1 second. My screen kind of clicked off for a second. Okay. So today, what we're going to talk about is, bridging the gap between your work, the things that you've learned, and also just giving your knowledge to helping parents. So the first thing I have to ask you is, let's go right into it. One of the things that I hear parents struggle with is post-game talks. So can you give your advice on how you went about it? And, but even before that, if you have something to say before that, you can jump right into that as well. But I have a few things I'm just going to ask you and let you just explain and go away with it.
Sure. Thank you. So I think, the first thing that I think about with post-game talks, with any part of working with a child who's an athlete, is first, what do they need from us? Okay, and what they need from us is to be parents, because we're always their parents. And so what does that mean? Well, baseball, and I'm sure, given, how long and the high level you played at, you've heard this many times, baseball is a game of failure, right? And when you say that, everyone goes, oh, yeah, sure, it's a game of failure. But what that means psychologically is it's a game of disappointment. And the reason that post-game talks in the car are so difficult, my guess is the days where your child goes 4 for 4 with a couple of extra base hits, it's not a difficult conversation. But when they go 0 for 4 and go down looking at strike 3 with the bases loaded, it can get difficult. And what you're doing, or what we need to think about, is what does our child need from us then? And one of the things I learned from a lot of different parents and other psychologists, is first, let your child bring the game to you. Some children have a need to talk about it a lot. Some kids have no need to talk about it. And we as parents often have a need to talk about it. So one of the things that I learned over time was, first, I needed a buddy. So what that meant was there were certain parents at the field, and most parents do this, that are your buddy. And you can talk about the frustration that you're experiencing, and you can listen to their frustration and not judge them, because we all know what it's like to see your kid fail on an athletic field. And then one of the things I would really suggest is, on non-competitive days, asking your child what they need from you during competition and after competition. And then whatever they tell you, do it. And if it's, I just want ice cream, or I need, some time to go cool off, fine. Or if they just need to explode and get it all out and then move on, that's okay too. But it's, what do they need, and meet their needs. But also keep in mind, we need to meet our needs as parents. That's where your buddy or your partner comes into the equation.
Amazing. Great info. So those of you who just jumped on, who are watching, his son actually is who I met first. He goes to college, and all the things that he's taught, or things that he's talking about right now, he's actually applied. So, I want to give you, I want you to talk more about how to, let's say the kid does want ice cream or whatever, explain that whole part, because you said, hey, whatever he needs, do it. So explain what you mean about that. I'm a little confused by that.
So sure, I have a couple of distinct memories from when my son played. He was about 10 or so, and I remember it was a little league field, little league game, and it was in my view a disastrous loss. And the thing that struck me the most after the loss was the kids on opposing teams were standing in line at the concession stand, laughing their heads off. And I was like, wow, that really taught me something. And what it taught me was this game means something very different to them than it did to me at that moment. So that was a humbling moment. And what that really, I still have this image in my mind, was it really told me that I need to meet my child where they are. And if they're yucking it up after an 0 for 4 day, then that's wonderful. If they're sad and crying or whatever, I need to let them do that. But the key part of this to me was to not pass judgment on it. They're coping with their disappointment and letdown or their success in their way. And as a parent, I need to meet them there. And then if I can be a part of it, great. If they don't need me in that space, I give them their space. Does that clarify it?
Yes, that's very clear. That's very clear. So I know you said that some of them may, go about it differently. But like one of the things that I get from parents is kids that are very hard on themselves. Mm-hmm. And so how would you help a parent navigate that situation as far as a kid that's hard on himself? Your kid, he seems like he's motivated. He works hard. And I don't get that sense that he's hard on himself. So can you explain that in your opinion?
Yes, so I'll clarify. My son is extremely hard on himself, and he gets it from me. Just he is, but he doesn't let it out. And I think that I'm going to be a little bit of a psychologist here. I'll give you a straight answer and then a little psychology behind it. Okay. So the question that I ask my son and I ask myself now when I'm really hard. So you have the game where you don't do well and I stink, I'm no good at this, all those thoughts. The question that I ask is, how are those thoughts helping you? And so what does that do? It gives you, it potentially breaks the cycle of negative thoughts and helps the child move away from being all emotion to some more higher thinking. Right? Because they're just thoughts and they're just judgments. We can introduce other thoughts and other judgments. Where those thoughts come from is what we call a fixed mindset, and that's the mindset. And there's a great book called Mindset by a psychologist called Carol Dweck, D-W-E-C-K, and it's called Mindset. And a fixed mindset is where we believe our abilities are carved in stone. That's where the myth of talent comes from, that people say, oh, this person, so I'm sure a lot of people said it about you, that you were so talented. Well, what you were was motivated and driven, so you had a purpose, so you practiced what you needed to practice to get better. But a fixed mindset says, I have my abilities, I won't get better. That is a really hard place to be when you have a bad day, versus a growth mindset, which says, I have basic qualities that I can cultivate if I put effort into it. So if we can help our child stop the fixed mindset thinking and sort of start thinking about, oh yeah, I can work on hitting a curveball. I can work on improving my fastball. As human beings, we are at our best when we feel like we're growing in a way we want to grow.
Amen. Amen. Yeah, amen. Yeah, you're 100% right. My question to add on that is, so how do we help our kid have a growth mindset? I know for me, my parents and the people that are watching this, they understand I didn't have pressure on me. So as far as the growth side of it, I never put too much pressure on myself. I never got down on myself for things. But my story is completely different. What about other kids who are having that, or parents who are putting pressure on their kid and they don't know, and their kid thinks they have to get results, and it's just, like you said, a fixed mindset instead of a growth mindset. So how do we build that?
So the first thing, and parents aren't going to like this, we model it. We live it in our own lives. And we be explicit when we face failure, how we're going to view that, right? Like, so when I make a mistake at work, do I come home and say, oh, I stink, I'm stupid, my boss is going to fire me? Or do I say, I was really disappointed in myself because I made that mistake, but here's what I did to get better so I don't do it again. So we live it. The other thing that you can do, and at the level you played at, this is what everybody does, that is to set practice goals for yourself, right? And this psychologist, Anders Ericsson, he's the psychologist, you've probably heard of the 10,000 hour rule. So he did the original research on that. And it doesn't hold. You don't need, it's more complicated than that. But what he discovered was not only do we need at least 10,000 hours to become an expert, but we need deliberate practice. And when you set deliberate practice, it means I'm working on this today. Each day I go to practice. That's cultivating a growth mindset. So I'm not going into the cage and just blindly swing. That doesn't get me any better. And in my heart, I kind of know it. But when I have deliberate practice, that's living a growth mindset. And the other thing parents can do is when they see their child using a growth mindset is to be explicit about it, to point it out. You don't have to throw a party or a parade, but just to say, I noticed you were disappointed, but you really focused on how you could improve. That's all you got to do.
That's awesome. That's great advice. And I think that advice can also be applied to parents who are on the sidelines watching the game. You see that they're I like to say in-game actions where you have some fans that are pouting or some parents that are upset when their kid doesn't get a hit, or, can they apply that too as far as watching a game?
Yeah. And having done that thousands of times, I can tell you it's a challenge. And it's harder to be a fan than a player, not from an execution standpoint, but from an emotional standpoint, because you're helpless up there. You see your child out there, you know how hard your child has worked, you know how much your kid cares about this, and then they underperform. And your heart breaks for them. And we all deal with that in different ways. That's where, I discovered the buddy was helpful, that I could go talk to my buddy and express it in a really inappropriate, socially unacceptable way just between him and me, and then we could move on. So I think, look, there's no saints among us. I'm not a saint. None of the parents I hung out with were saints. We all had our moments, and I think we need to help each other with those moments. And the other thing, and this was a turning point for me, my son was probably 14 or 15, and there was a game in which I yelled something inappropriate at a coach on the other team. And I was so embarrassed personally. And that changed everything. And I called that person and I apologized to him. And he was very gracious about it. And he laughed and said, I know you, but it changed it for me because it made me really realize this is not the parent I want to be. And when I get that in my head and I remind myself, it helps me stay calm. The other thing that really helps is at the end of the game, we had talked about the post-game discussion with the child. Everyone scrutinizes the performance of the child on the field. One of the things that's worth scrutinizing too is your performance as a parent. And that should be part of the discussion. How did I do today as your mom or dad? And my wife and I, when we're driving home from games in upstate New York now, we'll say, I was a good parent with this today when things didn't go well. Or, you know what, I wasn't. And that changes the framework and makes us realize that even though we're on the sidelines, we're a part of this. And we're an important part of it.
Amazing. Yeah, I never thought of that. That's amazing. So you touched on something as far as saying that you're invested, and as a parent, you're invested as a parent, and they want to get their kid to perform at their highest ability. Do you have any tips besides, I know you shared about the growth mindset, but do you have any other tips to help a parent get to, unlock their kid's full potential? Because that's what I hear all the time. It's like, you know what, you do an amazing job, but then when he gets on the field, I just can't get him to unlock his full potential. So is there any tips you can add to anything to give them some kind of insight from both your profession and being a parent?
Yes. So that's really important, and I think it's a widespread phenomenon. So the bad news here is, as parents, we cannot unlock our child's performance on the playing field. The good news is, as parents, we cannot unlock our child's performance on the playing field. It's up to them. And that's the beauty of sports, right? It's their thing. So what do we do as parents? Well, our job as parents is to nurture our child's interests. So if my kid loves baseball, I will support my child's getting better in baseball. If my kid loves computer science, I'll support that. It is to nurture their interests, and with that, to model good work ethics, right? Like I always felt very strongly as a parent that whatever my work ethic was, my kids were going to see. They could decide whether to live up to it or not, but they were at least going to see it. So we model a good work ethic. We let them have their game, and we model bouncing back from disappointment quickly. Amazing. So that when I have a terrible game, it's not the end of the world. It's a bad couple of minutes or an hour. We're feeling really bad, but then we bounce back. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that does. 1,000%. Okay. So let's keep it going. As far as I have a few more questions for you. As far as having fun, is there any things that you can give them to keep the game fun for their kid?
Yeah, I think the question you got to ask is why is my child playing this game, right? Are they playing this game so I don't have to pay for college, or so that they'll become like you, a professional baseball player, and they'll buy me a new house and a car, or are we playing this game because my kid loves the game, right? I mean, that's the question. And if this is something like one of the things I never did once with either of my children was I never told them they had to practice the sport. Because to me, it was like, this is a game. And if they are interested in it, they will practice it, right? As parents, our job is to help our children become independent, autonomous adults. And one of the beautiful things about athletics is it's their gig, so they're out on the field playing the sport, and they can decide how much they want to put into it. And some people want to put a ton into it, some people want to put a little into it, and that's okay. It's their choice. It's an optional part of life. But what they learn, as you know, from sports is you definitely get out what you put in. That if you don't put the work in, you're not going to go anywhere. And if you do put the work in, you'll go somewhere, but it's still going to be really hard. That sounds like real life to me. Yes.
There's a few things I want to say on top of that. So another question I got just from hearing you talk is, how do you help them motivate their kid? Because you said that, your job as a parent is to nurture their interests. But I feel like a lot of parents always ask me this question. It's like, I just don't know how to get him motivated. So is there even do they try to motivate him, or they shouldn't try to motivate him?
Yeah, I think that's a $1 million question. And I think my response to that is become curious about your child's motivation. What do I mean by that? We are all motivated to grow, develop, and accomplish in life. And with our children, it's the curiosity is, what's their interest? What lights their fire? I know what lights my fire, right? But it's not relevant to my children, unfortunately. It's be curious about. I've noticed, Johnny, you don't like going to practice. I mean, my son, right, who played a lot of sports when he was a kid, but there was one sport that he moaned about going to practice, and it was soccer. It was Sunday afternoons at 4 o'clock. We still joke about it, right? But he would complain about it, and I was like, this kid's not playing this sport for very long. Right? Because the motivation was there. Your job is to help your child find what lights their fire, even if as long as it's legal, but even if it's not something you're interested in. I remember a good friend of mine I grew up with was an outstanding hockey player, never made it to the pros, but played at a high level. And his son, so an extremely athletic family, 5 boys, all of them were great athletes. And his son got cancer when he was 4, got through his treatments, and it really eliminated his athletic career or potential. But his son became interested in history. And I remember this dad and this friend of mine talking about, this transition, but how gratifying it was to see his son go to history conventions and do all this stuff, right? When all he knew was athletics. But the joy in this dad with helping his son find his magic, find his interest. That's our job as parents. And it may be baseball, it may be softball, it could be the stock market. I don't know. But that's our job. And when people find what they love, they do it.
Yeah. I mean, I know being a younger player, I always hit. I always took ground balls. It's just what I love to do, and I think that's what I think now with paying for lessons, paying for travel ball, paying for, so much now that the parents are so invested that it's almost like they're putting pressure down their throat to the kids to perform and do well. It's almost their dream too, and I like what you said there as far as your job is to be supportive and back that kid.
And I have a sister who lives out in California who had a son who ended up playing college hockey, and travel hockey is really expensive. And I remember her kids were older than mine when my children were very young. And my son decided he wanted to take hitting lessons, and I looked at the price of it, and I was talking to her, and I was complaining about it. And she said something I never forgot. She said, "George, sports are cheaper than rehab."
Yep.
It's an activity. And that changed it for me. I never thought for a second this would pay off financially. That's not why you do it. You do it because it gives your child a structure. It's healthy. It gives them friendships. It teaches them how to work in a group of people. It's worth a ton of money. So maybe, Jermaine, you should raise your prices a little bit after this.
I'll take that advice. So let's keep it going. Okay. How about a kid that has confidence issues? Mm-hmm. How do we get through to them? How do we break through that?
That's a really, really good question. And my son Patrick and I talk about this all the time. Confidence is nonsense. Now, that's a crazy thing for a psychologist to say, okay? Yeah. Here's why. You don't need confidence. What you need is competence. You need skill. Because you can be, and you know this, you can be the most confident person in the world and not be able to hit a baseball, right? True. What you need is skill. And that ties into the growth mindset. When you are growing and developing and acquiring and improving the skills that you want to do to accomplish the goals you have, you will automatically be confident. People lack confidence when they lack skills and ability. And so there's two parts to that. There's the physical, here's how I hit a baseball, and there's the mental management of an athletic event. They are both skills. We tend to over-practice the physical and ignore the mental until it's game time and people can't figure out why I couldn't hit. Right? So it's bringing both of those together, and when you develop skills in both of those areas, then you feel competent. And you know what that feels like. You're going up to the plate, and you're pretty sure you're going to get a hit. And if you don't, you know you're going to have a quality at bat. Does that make sense? Does that difference make sense?
No, that definitely does. And you said the way to develop that mindset is the growth mindset.
Yes. Because you're always moving toward acquiring more skill in something you care about.
And so basically what you're saying is you should do everything with the purpose.
Yes. Exactly. That's okay. Exactly right.
Yeah, the more and more I hear, I'm like, I hear you saying that, and I'm like, okay. And then it finally just clicked once you said what you said just last time. Okay, so let's keep it going. As far as how about parents with other parents? Because this is one of the things I get as a coach now. The parents are coming to me because they heard other parents say other random things. Mm-hmm. So what's your advice to them listening to other parents? Because for me, I'm like, hey, a lot of parents don't understand, and they've never been around the journey, or they heard something and then they say that's right. So what's your advice to parents? Because I know you've been down that road where they're with your kids. Oh, you have to do this. You have to do this. And they're just telling you, and then they're frustrated. And then they come to someone like me to try to get advice. So I guess you get my question here?
Yes. So what I'm hearing is a parent hears another parent say something about, you do this, try this, whatever. And then they come to you saying, oh, gee, Mr. Curtis, what's going on? So one of the things I learned as a parent early on is that the competition between parents starts at birth. It's this race to who's going to walk first, who's going to talk first, who's going to be potty trained first, and it never stops. So with that, I think you got to know yourself and manage yourself. Right? I mean, one of the things that when there were teams that my son played on that I struggled with this, what I did was I found a place where there were no parents to watch the game. So I'd be out in the right field fence or whatever. So manage yourself, right? And know your own, that comes from our own insecurities, and it also comes out of love for our child, and that we don't want to miss something obvious for our kids. So like if my son should be getting hitting lessons from Jermaine Curtis, well, then I want that to happen. But it's not that simple, right? It's usually more petty and more anxiety provoking than that. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. I want to go back to where you watched the game. So majority of the time, did you watch the game by right field or by yourself, or were you around the other parents?
It depended entirely on the team he was on and how I connected to those parents. His high school team, we had some great friends. We always sat together. Some of his travel teams, we had a blast. There were other teams that it wasn't my thing, so I would isolate. There were also times, that where you're just not in a good place yourself, and so my response to that was always to sort of just isolate and not do damage. So.
Yeah, my dad and my parents, my mom's an extrovert, but my dad was an introvert. So he always stayed by himself. Mm-hmm. He'll watch the game with sunflower seeds in left field, just watching it, and just having a blast. And so like I always tell those stories because that just gives you a view of like how I played. And I think that, my perspective is my perspective, but I was just telling you that I believe sometimes that you might need to just get away, away from the rest of the parents, sit and just watch as a fan. But like you said, sometimes it's hard as a parent.
And I think I would make one comment in your description of your parents, who sound like wonderful people, is they let you have your baseball career. They let you do it. That's what it sounds like. And you decided how far you wanted to go with it,
1,000%. I was, I loved this game, and they were there to support me. We didn't have maybe the financial means, but they made it possible. Mm-hmm. And, and I was able to buy that house and that car for them.
Good for you. You're a good son.
So what about like positive reinforcement or like rewarding your kid to do things? Because one of the things that I remember, being in the front yard with my dad, and we'll have like a family event, and he'd be throwing wiffle balls to me, and I'd be hitting with it, and he'd be like, don't let me strike you out. And if I don't strike out, he would buy me a Kit Kat or something. So I always would try to like hit so I can get that Kit Kat. And I always tell people I'm still addicted to chocolate and Kit Kats now. But I just want to say that was like my reward for, and that was us having fun while practicing. So is there any, thing that you can give as far as like positive reinforcement, giving some rewards, just like, I believe that stuff works.
Mm-hmm. So, as a species, positive reinforcement, it gets us to do desired behaviors, right? So I go to work every day because at the end of the month, I get money. And that's positive reinforcement, right? So yes, positive reinforcement is really, really important. But I think as parents, think about what is it that you're reinforcing in your child. And different kids need different things. Some kids, it's initiating behaviors. Other kids, it's staying with behaviors. Some kids, it's when you think about the growth mindset, it's recognizing and reinforcing, that. So I think, and the other thing is, each family functions in different ways. It sounds like this was a really cool part of your relationship with your father. So I think it's blending that in, but it's whatever you give. Whatever you're rewarding, just be conscious of the behavior that you are rewarding. So when we're in the grocery store and my 2-year-old throws a temper tantrum and I give him the Kit Kat, I just created a big problem for myself, right?
Yeah.
But like what your dad was teaching you was to be mentally tough at the plate.
Yes. And what about another question I get from the parents is managing expectations. Mm-hmm. And so can you give a little insight as far as that from both the parent side and from the kid side? Because the kid, he wants to play in the MLB. He's seeing, the kids or the players on TV, and he thinks that he needs to get 5 hits every game. So talk about that as far as how to, and I know you kind of touched on it, but I'm throwing it out there because that's one of the main questions that people are asking.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think I'll go back to being curious, meaning when your child is talking about these expectations, being curious about it, asking them about it. Gee, Johnny, you think you should get 5 hits every game. Do you think that's possible? Oh, yeah, I did it once. Do you think it's something you can do every game, right? How many players do you know who do that every game? So, make it part of the conversation. Look, it's your child's expectations. It's their disappointment. They'll get over it. They'll recover from it. But it's really about, one of the great parts of sports is people think about these amazing outcomes all the time. Sunday morning, turn your TV on 7 o'clock, and it's people on TV in suits talking about the NFL that's not happening for 6 hours, right? And about outcomes. And it's fun to fantasize, right? I love to think I would go 5 for 5 every day. But, that doesn't mean I'm psychotic. The question that comes to my mind is that helping or hurting your child? Right? And some kids, it's just a cool fantasy. Some kids, it becomes a real distraction on game day. And that's why you need to be curious about it. And when you think about expectations, baseball is not a game, softball, they are not games where you can focus on outcomes, right? Because as you know, you can hit the ball, crush it 4 times and be 0 for 4 that day. Right? And the stat sheet looks the same as if you went down looking 4 times that day. It's not a game where you have any control over the outcome. What you can control is your skill and your approach in the batter's box or in the field when you're playing defense. You can't control how this thing's going to turn out. And that's a really big shift for a player to make, to let go of the outcome.
So how do you teach that? Is there a way? You have 2 boys. Yep. Was there a way for you to teach that? Did you teach that, or?
I did not teach it because I was terrible at it when my children were young. I was focused on outcomes only, and it took me a long time to learn. And I read a book called "With Winning in Mind" by a guy named Larry Basham. I don't know. Are you familiar with it?
No.
Okay, so he was a gold medal sharpshooter in the Olympics. And he talked about the year he went to the Olympics, he came in second, got the silver medal, and he was crushed. And he couldn't figure out why he underperformed because he was better than the guy who got the gold. So he went around and talked to gold medal Olympic athletes and said, tell me how you do this. And what they consistently talked about was, we only talk about the things we do well and our successes, right? So that changed things for me, because it all of a sudden it wasn't, oh, did he hit a home run? It was, what was the quality of the at bat? Because you can do everything right at the plate in baseball and still be out, right? So if you're going to focus on the outcome, you might as well, take up something else, because this is going to be a really tough road for you. But if you focus on your process, your skill, how you executed, it's an incredibly freeing experience. And I see that, with my son, when he transitioned into, that was the focus.
Yes. I like to say that the difference between the amateur and a pro is the pro, all he talks about or all he thinks about is the process, and all he focuses on. We do want to hit a home run, 2 home runs a game, go 3 for 3, but I'm also trying to get 3 quality at bats too. So I'm focusing on the quality, because if I focus on that, the reward will come if you're doing the things right, So, that's a great point. So a few more questions for you. And what about, I see nowadays kids are babying their kid. So what's your advice for that? Like, they're not being tough on them, they're sheltering them. Is that, is that going to help them or hurt them in the game of baseball, in your opinion?
So this is a hard question. There's the label of the helicopter parent, right? And that was, like 10, 15 years ago. The new label is the lawnmower parent. Like they are right on top of the kid, So again, what is your job as a parent? And is your job to solve your child's problems? And if it is, then be a helicopter or a lawnmower parent, and you can get really good at it, and your kid will get good at nothing, right? Your job is to help your child grow and develop. And sports is a wonderful, safe place for that to happen, right? Because if your kid fails miserably and the worst thing that happens to them that day is they're 0 for 4, that ain't bad. Right. So I think it's, and it has to be age appropriate. Look at an 8-year-old and a 16-year-old are very different developmentally. It's age appropriate. But we have to be thinking about how to use these experiences to help our child gain life skills. And kids feel really good about themselves when they resolve a conflict, right? When they work out something tough, when they overcome something, they feel really good about themselves. That's part of the competence of being an athlete.
Amazing. I want to go back a little bit. I know I'm jumping around, but I liked what you said about the book. And can you explain more about that book? And then how did you implement it slowly to get, your athlete to think that way? And then how did you just immediately go that route? And then when you're around parents who are thinking only on outcomes, how did you, block them out so you can stay in your lane?
Yeah. So I'm the guy in the stands when someone flies out who will say good at bat. So I focus on the quality of the at bat. And for me, it was actually not a slow transition. I mean, I was 15 pages into this book and this light just went on and I was like, oh my God, I've been doing this all wrong. It's modeling, right? What we talk about, what we pay attention to. And when you talk with your child after the game, talking about, the quality of their at-bats is a really good thing. And it moves the conversation, right? Like I never told my son, don't talk about your failures, right? But there was a time where I talked a lot about his failures, and it really annoyed the daylights out of him, right? And because, what we put in our minds is where we go. So if I'm thinking about striking out, fouling out, making an error, guess what I'm going to do? If I am thinking about, a quality approach that simplifies the at-bat, that's what I'm going to do, right? So I think that's the thing. It's live it yourself, right? And your child will hear, our kids see and hear everything we do, as annoying as that is, it's true. Live it and see what happens.
So this is just, I don't have any more questions. You pretty much answered everything. And if you have anything else to say, can you please say it? But I wanted to just ask, what was the, recruiting process like? What was, from your point of view, how was all that? Was it really stressful? Was it not? Just talk about everything.
That's a really good question. And I wish I had a cheerful answer, but I don't. The recruiting process was one of the hardest things that we as a family ever did. And that's probably good. Our family hasn't had much misfortune. But it was really hard. And what was hard was that people don't tell you the truth. Coaches lied to my son over and over and over again, and it was heartbreaking to see him go through that. He knew his ability. We knew his ability because, we'd seen thousands of baseball games and players. We knew it wasn't fantastical. We knew he wasn't, at the time, a top Division I player, but we knew about where he fit. And people just lied to him. And they led him on and misled him, and that was really hard. And then you're going along, and I've always said this, my sort of faith system in life is that God drops people in our lives when we need them most. And I think there were two people that dropped into my son's life. One was his lifelong hitting instructor, Matt Knox, at Elite Baseball in Lancaster, or Mount Joy, Pennsylvania, who was the most honest, straightforward person that was always available when my son was struggling with this. And the other person was Rob Grove, who's the head coach at RIT. And that when we went up to meet him, he was no BS. He was straight to the point and told my son where he would fit on this team. And it was like, I tell the story. We live in Hershey, Pennsylvania, so Rochester's like 4.5 hour ride. We were driving up there, and I was thinking in the drive, I'm like, oh boy, here we go, 2 more days wasted on baseball. And then we get there and we drive around the campus. I'm like, this is really nice. And then we meet the coach the next morning, and I just texted my wife and said, it's a hidden gem. This place is amazing. I think, honestly, you're one of those people for my son as well at this point in his life. So while the recruiting process is hard and not truthful, if you are honest about your own abilities and your son's abilities, and you are connected to people who are men and women of integrity, it will happen and you will end up in the right place. But it probably isn't going to be easy. But don't give up, because it's great to get there. And there are some amazing people in sports, and there are some unamazing people in sports. But the amazing people tend to surface when you need them the most.
That's amazing. That's amazing. You just had a speech there. That was that was amazing.
I'm a professor, So.
My question to you is: you said I know Pat, and great kid, by the way, very great, hardworking. You guys did right by him. Is he the youngest of the group?
He is. He's my second. Yeah.
Okay, so my question to you is: you're from a small town, right? Hershey is pretty small.
Yep, small town. Yep.
Okay, so if you had to do it all over again, the whole recruiting process, the parenting, can you start from the ground? What would you do and walk through from, playing in Little League all the way up through the recruiting process and getting a scholarship again or going to college?
Honestly, I think there's only one thing I would do differently, and that is I would have read that book with winning in mind when the kids were 5 years old. I think it would have freed me up of a lot of well-intended but misguided efforts for them. I think that's the only thing I would have done differently. We loved, with the boys growing up in Hershey, we loved the travel programs they were in. It's not perfect, but the people, and this is interesting. A friend of mine who actually pitched in college, Danny George is his name. He's an anthropologist. And we were talking at a Christmas party one year. Patrick had 2 opportunities to play when he was 12, his Little League All-Stars or another All-Star team in the upcoming summer. And we were talking about, well, which would be better for him? And Danny he's like, look, man, this is all about relationships. It's about the people you're with. Play with your buddies. It's simple. And like this light bulb went on, and as I've watched him grow, what I've seen is these awesome relationships with great young men, and same thing in college. I mean, he's just awesome. And so you go where the people are that are your friends and you're connected to, and it'll work out. And is there always a more competitive opportunity somewhere? Yes, there will be. Unless you did what you did and played in the major leagues, there's always going to be something more competitive. Who cares, right? I mean, you can get better just playing the game, and you find your group, you work with them, you care about them, you care about each other. That's what gives us the gratification in life. So
amazing. Well, I appreciate you. I would love for you, if you have any more notes or anything just to give to the parents, you go ahead and let it out right now. I'm definitely grabbing that book, and I'm going to start sharing that to parents, because I mean that's a good book to read. You're high on it, and I'm high on it now too.
Yeah, it's good, and it's like $10 on Amazon, so it's a great deal. So I don't have any closing remarks other than, I think what you're doing up there is it's wonderful. So I wish you, great success. If you want to do this again, I'm happy to. If you want to do a call-in with parents, I'm happy to do that. You're doing great work. Keep it up. I know you're transitioning to the next phase of your life,
Yep.
which is never easy. But you're going to be successful. You know how to be successful. So, and thank you again for what you do for my son.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you. All right. I'll see you, and we definitely will do a call soon.
Okay. Thanks, Jermaine.
All right. Bye.
Take care.